Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you all very much for giving up your time this morning to join us. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. And while I realise that might be different for many of you given the virtual nature of today's event, for me, the traditional owners of the land are the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also just like to advise everyone that this webinar is being recorded for the purposes of actually sending you a copy at the end. My name is Kylie Hargreaves and I will be your moderator today. I come to you with 25 years trade and investment experience with the Commonwealth and New South Wales governments, including as Austrade's Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner for Spain, Portugal, West USA, the UK, Ireland and Israel. I'm also an Executive Committee member for the Regional Development Australia Sydney branch. Regional Development Australia, or RDA for short, is a national network of 52 geographically focused committees. My RDA for Sydney, for example, works across 33 local government areas covering the Greater Sydney area. Each RDA is tasked with supporting economic growth and job creation in their local areas. With such a large economic area of responsibility, it's no wonder that RDA Sydney has a large number of potential and actual current exporters. As such, we hope the export focus session today and future ones will be of some assistance to exporters in our region. Just to give you a sense of logistics, today will run for 60 minutes. The first half of the program will be taken up by some discussion with our panelists, whom I will introduce to you each shortly. They've been asked to provide some brief comments to some pre-arranged questions. The second half of the hour, so around 11:30, I'm hoping to open up the floor and take some questions from our online audience. So if you think of a question during the discussion, please write it down and remember to ask it when we open up for the interactive session. You can also type them live into the Q&A function, which you should be able to see down on the bottom navigation button. So if you'd like to type questions in there during the discussion, please do so and we'll try and get to them during the session. The panelists will also, if there's a quick and easy one for one of them to answer, we'll try and do so live at the same time as well. So without much further ado, please let me introduce our panelists who come to us from the Export Council of Australia, Export Finance Australia, and the New South Wales Treasury Trade and Investment Division. I'll introduce each of the panelists briefly so you know a bit more about each one of them before we start throwing questions at them. Once I've introduced all of them, I'll then ask Dianne to kick us off with her thoughts on why export can be an excellent growth strategy for Australian companies. We will then break into some questions about the challenges and opportunities our panelists can see facing exporters during COVID-19 and opportunities that might emerge post-COVID-19. So, Diane Tipping. Diane has been involved in trade promotion and facilitation for more than 35 years. She is chair of the Export Council of Australia and its Education Committee, and founder and managing director of Excon International Pty Limited, an export management consultancy business. We also have with us today Cherith Amarasinghe. He joins us from Export Finance Australia, where he is Director of Business Development for the ACT and New South Wales. Cherith has quite an interesting and diverse background covering sales, marketing, small business financing, corporate banking, and of course, more recently, export financing. Peter Mackey is the Director of International Trade with New South Wales Treasury Trade and Investment Division. Peter joined New South Wales Government in 2015 after 7 years with Austrade, which included 2 international postings as Trade Commissioner to Vietnam and Singapore. During this time, he also led Austrade's regional education team across ASEAN, promoting Australia as an education destination. Prior to joining Austrade, Peter ran an education software startup business exporting to several countries across North Asia and ASEAN, as well as Latin America. So, on to the questions. Dianne, if we could go to you first. Exporting tends to be more complex and therefore potentially more challenging than selling domestically. To help us set the scene, as we have both potential and existing exporters with us this morning, could I ask you just to provide a few comments on why companies often embrace exporting as a growth strategy despite the difficulties?
Certainly. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Kylie. The Export Council was established well over 60 years ago to promote, to educate and to upskill manufacturers and producers in Australia to export. We still do that, and we do that by advocating to government for policy reform. We do that by upskilling exporters and providing information on the current issues that are happening at the time. Obviously, at the moment, we're very busy because we have a lot of members and stakeholders that are wanting to know a lot about what is happening at the moment and how they can either continue to export or how they can begin to export. And there are people asking about getting into the export market. The reasons for export are very simple. It's to make money. It's to, there are 7 billion people in the world and we only have 25 million in Australia. So that's a very good reason to look internationally. Currently, the very good reasons, and I could put 8 or 10 down very quickly, to ensure that we tap into the global base of this 7 billion population, to look at premium price opportunities. Australia's reputation is well perceived and has a great, awareness from the rest of the world about our quality and our high Australian standards. But I also need to point out very, very quickly there that we're not the only country that does have these high standards. And the demand for technologies, we have great, wonderful technologies in Australia. Our dependence on one market, which is going back to that 7 billion versus domestically in Australia, taking advantages of the 13 FTAs that the Australian government has negotiated, with more coming online as we move forward in the rest of the year and into next year when other countries have the ability to put some things into place, particularly Indonesia, who have agreed to go forward with our FTA with Australia, but are obviously very involved in other issues at the moment, and that ratification from their end is not quite happening at the moment. You might be worried about why in this time would I want to export. Going global is a big step, but it can be worth it, and there are many other reasons. Particularly at this time, we have a very good advantage to being perhaps one of the first countries back into having the ability to export, to be back into the market. We can get our product out, and I'll talk about that later. It does have its challenges, but we're one of the first countries that have managed the COVID-19 fairly well, and we can get our product to other markets. So I would encourage everyone to look at exporting, particularly in this, again, I go back to this challenging time. There are a lot of Australian businesses and organisations that do have domestic challenges. So if, the market is even going to be smaller than what we probably had originally in Australia last year at the beginning of this year. Export is a good opportunity to grow that market and to look at the challenges of improving what you're doing now and getting into that overseas market. A lot, not simply easier, but a lot easier than you would normally, because the competition may not be as great at the moment. It's not saying there won't be competition, but there are some opportunities as well as the challenges ahead for us all.
Thanks, Diane. So exports was good for growth and for innovation and testing yourself out on competition. It still is. It's just a little bit more challenging at the moment. Peter, if I can go to you, the New South Wales Treasury Trade and Investment Team works with hundreds of New South Wales exporters across all sorts of sectors, from services to tech, advanced manufacturing, commodities. Diane's obviously outlined some great reasons to consider export. I wonder if you could comment briefly on what barriers you're currently seeing exporters facing at this particular time.
Sure, thanks, Kylie. And can you hear me okay? Great. So look, the first thing probably just to start out is to, as you said, the New South Wales government delivers the Trade Start program on behalf of Austrade, which is essentially an extension of the Austrade network throughout New South Wales. So we have regional export advisors in all parts of the state. We have a team of export advisors based here in Sydney. When the COVID-19 situation started unfolding, the New South Wales Treasury team was essentially put into siege mode, and we were all redeployed into different areas. So in the first instance, there was an immediate reaction in terms of trying to support the provision and procurement of PPE, the personal protective equipment, and there was a process by which we were talking to existing companies who were producing various products either for the domestic market or for export that could be beneficial in terms of pivoting towards the production of hand sanitizer or ventilators and those sorts of things. So there was an initial process where we were literally just trying to respond to the immediate crisis. As things started to become more under control, we then commenced the process of trying to understand the impact that the crisis was having on the businesses. And really, I mean, obviously it was devastating, but what we wanted to understand was exactly how it was impacting them, and more importantly, what we could do to respond to that. So we undertook a client outreach exercise and gathered the insights of over 350 businesses through contact and surveying and so on. They identified 5 issues. So the 5 issues, unsurprisingly, first was cash flow and access to capital. That was the immediate challenge. Major challenges and disruptions to their supply chains. So they were both domestic and international. The restriction to movement that was placed obviously internationally for our tourism sector and our international education sector, that was an immediate game changer. But also the changes to restriction to movement domestically also had an impact on businesses. The 4th area was naturally reduced customer demand, and as we've seen in the press, people are not spending as much. You know, they can't spend as much. They're not going out in their cars. They're in lockdown. So whilst some online, you know, I think there's been some changes in customer behaviour through increased online, and we can talk about that a bit later. People seem to be spending less, certainly domestically and also internationally. And then the 5th area was the challenge in accessing export markets. And the prime reason for that was the disruption to freight, particularly air freight. And again, I think we're going to talk about that a bit later. A staggeringly high number of produce and goods go out in the belly of passenger jets. It's something like 80%. I think Dianne will be able to correct me on that number, but it's certainly very, very high. So as soon as the passenger jets stopped flying, then, you know, there was an immediate problem for those exporters who were reliant on air freight. Sea freight, I think, is less of an issue, but there still have been some challenges there. But again, we can cover off that later. So they were the 5 key issues they told us. The sectors that we identified as being most impacted were ag tech and food tech, or just the ag and food sector more generally, but also the tech elements of that. The advanced manufacturing sector, agribusiness, professional services were the ones that seemed to be identifying as the ones most challenged by the current situation. So that's just some initial insights from what the companies around the state say. I should also add that there are around 765,000 SMEs in New South Wales, but we've only got around 3% of those exporting. So it's really important, as Diane alluded to, that we remind companies of the benefits of exporting. And in fact, ironically, this time of crisis might be the time that you reconsider your business model and you know, think again about the potential for export, particularly if you're able to engage in some of the e-commerce platforms again, which I'm sure we'll touch on a bit later. So that's just a few initial insights, Kylie. That's
fantastic. In terms of those sort of 5 areas that are of most concern, how has that changed the way that you're actually working with New South Wales businesses?
So, look, the first thing we had to do, because of that reason that we've got so few exporters relative to the number of SMEs in the state, we play a dual role. So we work with existing exporters, but we also work with partners like the Export Council and Export Finance Australia and others to try and, I guess, grow and engender that culture of export and get more people to export. So the way that we do that is by running face-to-face workshops. We run them all around the state. So we obviously couldn't do that from overnight. So we've had to switch very, very quickly into an online mode like the rest of the world. So we're running seminars on platforms like this. We decided to prioritise some market updates from our offshore network. So we have an offshore network in about 10 different locations internationally. We were obviously aware that companies were wanting to know what was going on. I mean, you hear certain insights through the press, but you know, you can't beat getting that insights from on the ground. So we prioritised some market updates. We did market updates with our people in China and in Japan and the UK and other places. We've got some similar ones coming up for India
80 years.
Peter, we've just lost you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yep, sorry, I don't know what's happening.
We lost you at, you've just done China.
Okay, so China, and you hear me again? Yeah. Yeah, China and Japan and the UK, and we've also got some ones coming up for the for India and the UAE and the US, and that was really useful just to be able to get an idea of what's actually going on the ground, both in terms of the COVID situation, but also to get some tips around what sectors are prospective, what ones are really challenged, what the situation in terms of freight was, what advice we have, and we're going to talk about a little bit about that later in today, so I can share some of those insights from our offshore network. So it's really just been a case of pivoting. Fortunately, with our network of export advisors, because they're based and they cover such large regions, they're used to working with companies remotely. So in fact, it actually hasn't had that much of a difference in terms of the way that they're working with businesses. But more importantly, they're trying to help those businesses shift their models to adapt to the new environment.
Fantastic, thank you. Peter, there's a question in Q&A from, Angela. Hello, Angela, that you might want to consider, but I might just take the segue from what you've just said, because the first one of your 5 was actually cash flow and capital. And I might actually use that as a segue to go to Cherith. Cherith, the Export Finance Australia has actually been helping Australian exporters for decades with some of their cash flow and capital issues relating to export. Obviously, COVID-19 is unprecedented in our living memory, but I wondered if you could cover a bit of a spectrum. First of all, tell us a little bit about Export Finance Australia, the usual support you can provide to exporters, and then specifically what might be different under the COVID-19 situation that we're currently in.
Thanks, Kylie. Good morning, everyone. Yes, as you rightly pointed out, we have been helping businesses for over 6 decades, but we do have a reputation to be a best kept secret sometimes. So I will spend a minute to explain who we are and what we do, because we do have a unique mandate, and I'll touch on our usual support and what additional support may be available due to COVID. So firstly, Export Finance Australia, or previously known as EFIC, is the official export credit agency of Australia. We provide a range of loans and guarantees to Australian businesses that are engaged in export-related business activities. The reason why I say export-related is it is not only meant for exporters, companies who directly export a product or service. It could also be companies who are part of an export supply chain, and it could also extend to tourism businesses that help that service international tourists as well. So it is a broad range. It can also be companies who wish to expand into another market, whether that's setting up a sales office as well. So we capture all that as export related activities. We still, although the change in name and somewhat to change in our mandate, we still remain owned by the government. However, we operate on a commercial basis independently of the government. So with that, all the financial solutions that we provide would carry commercial terms, and there'll be some criteria that we need to adhere to. I won't go into too much detail around that, but that's all available on our website. We do have a very unique mandate where we can't actively be competing with the banks or the private sector. What that simply means is that when we provide finance to a business, they have been unable to secure comparable finance from their bank. The most common reason we see is a lack of tangible security that the banks need in the form of a mortgage over the director's property or any other hard assets that you need to provide in order to secure funding. So that's a bit about who we are and how we approach the financing requests that we do get. So in terms of our general support, this is pre-COVID as well as post-COVID, because we still continue to offer the same. Generally, not always, generally our support is attached to a specific export contract or an opportunity. And that could be in the form of working capital, so short-term working capital where you need to pay your suppliers 6 months in advance before you may get paid for the product or service that you provide. We can also provide bank guarantees. So in certain industries, you may need to provide performance bonds, advance payment guarantees, or warranty bonds. We can help with those, as well as medium to longer term funding, especially if it's a capital expenditure requirement where you need to increase capacity at your factory, or you need to set up a distribution or a warehouse capability overseas in order to increase export revenues. That's something that we could consider. So post-COVID, we are evolving week by week, as many organizations would. So we had to really, firstly, we saw an impact to our existing client base in terms of supply chain disruption. So we had to really work with them to extend our repayments and help them in many ways to restructure our existing loan book. And we are still open to looking at new funding as well, under the general business criteria we have. But as some of you may be aware, the government recently made an announcement about the Export Capital Facility, which is additional $500 million that Export Finance Australia now administers. So this is aimed at businesses that have been historically profitable but have had a material adverse impact from COVID, and they need to finance or fund expenses over say next 6, 12 or 18 months, whatever that recovery period is, so that you can be sustainable through that period and come out at the other end. So some of these businesses may not be able to meet our standard criteria. For example, they may not have a new export purchase order that they can present to us to get funding. So this is where we can extend those by using the new facility to finance some of those businesses. So again, there are criteria attached to that. There's a minimum financing requirement of $250,000. And that's partly because it complements the SME guarantee scheme, which many businesses would be familiar with. That is available through their banks, where they can secure up to $250,000 in funding, which is underwritten, partly underwritten by the Treasury. So this complements that, where the businesses may need to borrow more than $250,000 to sustain that period until they come out at the other end. So just mindful of the 30 minutes time. So I'll stop there, but happy to answer any questions later on.
Thanks very much. And I'm sure the website is full of a font of knowledge as well, right?
Yes, yes.
Dianne, as chair of the Export Council of Australia, you'll have a nice helicopter view of sort of different avenues of assistance that are available to exporters. Could I ask you just to comment on one or two that has emerged as a result of the COVID situation that exporters may not be aware of?
Thank you, Kylie. I just wanted to reiterate my comments earlier. You know, the point about why export is really important, but also we can export at the moment. I want everyone to be aware that there are many opportunities and we can export, and we need to export. More importantly, we need to export. It's for the economic benefit of individuals, of a company that wants to export, but for all Australians. You know, 1 in 5 jobs in Australia are attributed to the exporting community. So we do need to export, and we need to continue to export. And from that sort of thought line, the Australian government has realised that they did need to do some more stimulus work in regards to exporters. So we have our general, you know, stimulus packages, the JobKeeper, the JobSeeker, which help all businesses in Australia and all people in Australia, well, nearly all people in Australia. The state governments have many lots of avenues of work that they're doing. Some are grants. I know the New South Wales government has business grants for certain businesses. There's lots of opportunities at state level and at federal level for funding and stimulus packages. But in relation to trade, there are basically 3 packages only. And they are, well, package 1 is basically the one that Cherith has just talked about, and that's the EFA funding program, or I'm going to call it a loan program, if you don't mind, Cherith, because it is a loan, and you've explained it quite well. And I think it's important that all exporters are aware that that opportunity is there. There are conditions and criteria, and I do want to remind everyone, and don't take this badly, Cherith, but it is a loan. So I just want to be. Sorry, yeah.
No, thank you. No.
I want everyone to know that. And I think when we think about the JobKeeper and job seeker, all of these things are necessary, and they will be obviously opportunities for us to continue working at the moment. But we do need to remember that things may get a little tougher as time goes on, because all of these stimulus arrangements will need to be, covered in the time to come, in the years to come. The second package is additional funds for the EMDG program, which is administered by Austrade. The government has so this is the Export Market Development Grant, and the government has injected an additional 49.8 million into this program, which is really, really helpful at the moment. It's got some good things in this grant. The EMDG program in the 2019-20 financial year will allow exporters and tourism businesses to obtain additional reimbursements for costs incurred in marketing their products and services around the world. The scheme has been a popular vehicle to support the costs associated in reaching new markets, and this additional funding will give Australian exporters and tourism businesses extra help in these tough times. We do need to remember, and I think Peter alluded to this, the bushfires originally, before COVID-19, already had a lot of businesses in a difficult situation. So the EMDG will be quite helpful. It will allow businesses that have spent money on marketing and perhaps wanting to attend events overseas that they can't do, or have events here that they can't run anymore, to get some benefit back when they claim against the EMDG. The investment addresses the reality that businesses invested in good faith. So it's a good program, and I would really encourage everyone to talk to Austrade if they're in that realm of needing that grant sort of opportunity, to talk to Austrade and or perhaps talk to their own EMDG consultant, or to talk to an EMDG consultant about the opportunity they have to make a claim against that fund. The third one is the International Freight Mechanism Assistance, IFAM for short, and that's a $110 million international freight assistance program that was established to basically ramp up assistance to exporters and re-establish global supply chains. In the first 3 weeks of operation of the IFAM grouping, if you like, over 560 Australian businesses have registered their interest, and around 70 flights have already been secured for product. Now, that sounds great, but please remember, or please understand, that this program has been established to accelerate delivery of agriculture and fisheries exports into key overseas markets. The packages allow exporters to re-establish their global supply chains, and it is, as I mentioned, for certain commodities. The purpose of this is that these products, such as seafood, meat, dairy, vegetables and fruit, are livable products basically, and they're seasonal, and they can't wait until a flight is available. And we talked very early, a little earlier, Peter and I alluded to the freight issues. Freight is starting to move even better as we talk, but there are lots of issues with air freight at the moment, and Peter did mention about the belly of an aircraft is the most common way, of a passenger aircraft is the most common way for freight to move. So not a lot of passenger aircrafts are coming into Australia, and when they do, they're not taking passengers back out. They're bringing repatriated Australians back to Australia. So at the end of the day, we do have a problem with air freight. The IFAM package has been established to look at the livable products. So all of the other products, which I'm sure a lot of the listeners are, involved in that type of area of productivity or product manufacturing, we have to look at how we can get our goods out. Now, Austrade has, and so does the Export Council, and I'm sure that many other industry bodies in New South Wales have it on their website as well, the availability of other freight systems that are going out. The issue with that is that there will be additional costs because they are in a situation where these flights don't have the passengers to compensate for freight pricing. So the freight pricing is quite high. The sea freight is happening. There are a number of blank sailings, happening around the world, which means cargo doesn't move as quickly as it should, and they're delayed in ports a bit longer than they need, or they usually are. I don't say they need to be, but they usually may be delayed longer than necessary. And some of the freight rates are a bit higher, even in the sea freight area. We also have a problem with, you know, the movement of containers, particularly food grade containers and refrigeration containers. So there are issues in freight, but it can happen. The IFAM package has been established, as I said, to look after a particular commodity base. The other products need to talk to their forwarders or look at the different sites that are available. But at the end of the day, you know, I would like to tell you a story about a yogurt manufacturer that is paying additional freight to get their product. They have to wait a few days, but they're paying additional freight. At the end of the day, their view on this is they need to sustain their market overseas. They do not know how long they can do this, but if they don't supply their particularly existing markets overseas, they will lose that market to someone else. So that's the issue a lot of exporters have to consider. So, you know, go and look at the websites of Austrade, the Export Council and other organisations for available flights. They are there. You may need to reconsider your strategy and whether you are exporting to that particular market or look at another one. You need to consider how this is all going to work. So I think the three packages are worthwhile, but at the end of the day, they're not basically free. The EFA one is a loan. The IFAM package, there still has to be a freight component paid by the shipper, and the EMDG is a good package. You need to talk to your EMDG consultant to get advice on how that works. Thanks, Kylie.
Fantastic. Thanks, Diane. I'm about to open it up. It's about 11:33, so I'm going to open it up to some questions. But I think what you're alluding to there, Diane, and I might get Peter just to briefly touch on what he's seeing from the international and New South Wales exporters. We have to be innovative. And I don't mean innovative as in we have to come up with some great new technology. I mean, we have to think about our businesses. We have to rethink what we can do. So, you know, I know some of the meat suppliers, for example, are, you know, seeing what they can do in terms of freezing their product while they wait for the freight to open up. Others are moving from fresh produce to frozen produce and things like this. So across all sectors, we need to rethink what we can do facing some of the barriers. And I was just thinking, Peter, before we open up to the questions, maybe some of those innovative approaches or areas of opportunity that you're seeing from what the New South Wales government is doing with exporters might be a positive way to start the question session.
Sure. Kylie, look, I mean, like Australia, the world has changed, obviously, and I think it's important, just some general observations before I go into some individual insights from particular markets. You know, people are staying at home, they're buying online, they're cooking at home, even as, you know, as lockdowns start to open up, the world, you know, of work and the world of living at home and so on, I think is going to be different, at least for the next 12 to 18 months until we've got, you know, a vaccine. So any of those people who are able to sell through e-commerce platforms, you know, food and beverage remains strong and high in demand. People want fresh and good produce. Software, technology, you know, e-learning, people who are able to deliver any of those solutions online, I think are benefiting. You know, consumer goods and anything in that sort of health and well-being space, people are incredibly more conscious of their health. So I think they're just some general observations. We're obviously in challenging times at the moment with China, but we're seeing some really positive green shoots coming out of there. A lot of our exporters in the food and beverage space were impacted in the early days, particularly because of the freight and, you know, getting goods up there. But, you know, as things start to open up, and in China, we're really trying to focus on what the opportunities are up there. And I think for a lot of our premium produce exporters, there's great opportunities to meet the growing demand up there, and particularly also in that health and wellbeing space. Some interesting insights from the UAE. You mentioned about you know, chilled beef. So notwithstanding the comments that Diane was making, you know, obviously the freight costs and the capacity has definitely impacted exports to that region. But our Trade Investment Commissioner reports that just in terms of a stat, over the last 3 months, Emirates have actually transported more than over 5,000 metric tonnes of chilled meat and fruits, fruit and vegetables from Australia. So the UAE, you know, as in many parts of the world, there's strong domestic consumption. and the demand remains strong for food and beverage in the Gulf region. You can hear me still?
Yep.
Yep, good. But, you know, that change in consumer pattern is definitely forcing businesses to adjust and shift. In terms of how they export that. One thing I did want just to stress too while we're on the UAE is that we've just had confirmation recently that Dubai 2020, the big international expo, has been postponed and will at this stage run in October of 2021. The New South Wales government will be a strong supporter of that program, as with the Australian government, of course. So we will make sure we provide information as you know, in the coming months about preparations for that. UK and Europe, I think, you know, they were so drastically impacted and so in such an unexpected way. Our Trade Investment Commissioner based in London just reports that fear of the unknown is still very strong there in terms of the economic impact. I mean, I noted this morning on the news that the UK had overtaken Italy in terms of deaths, which is just unbelievable. Ironically, she said the different kind of working hours means that it's sort of, in some ways, easier to connect with businesses in the UK around that. So in other words, that time zone, now that we're out of a sort of a 9 to 5 world, that time zone perhaps is less of a barrier. And you know, given it's sort of like a 12-month lead time to enter some of those markets, it's a great opportunity at the moment for businesses to do that analysis and that research. So we would certainly encourage businesses that are listening here that are either considering exporting to some of these markets to get in touch with us. And I'll put up later on the link to our export advisors of how you can get in touch with those, and they can connect you up with our offshore network. Yeah, and then I think in...
Yep, we've lost you, Peter. Lost you.
How's that?
Yep.
I don't know what's happening, sorry. Did I get to India?
No.
No, I finished, okay. Sorry, let me... Where did I get to, Kylie, when I dropped off?
So
UK?
You just finished the UK, yep.
Okay, so I was just moving on to India. So the situation in India is they've obviously managed, given the size of their population, they've managed the situation relatively well. But now that they're starting to open up, there is the concern that it's going to get worse before it gets better. So again, opportunities for our Trade Investment Commissioner there is highlighting in the healthcare and medtech space. So again, as with anywhere around the world, there's much more interest in how to deliver these services online, and I think we're going to continue with the efficiency. Or by drone. Or by drone, yes, that's right. But just in terms of I think we've overcome a paradigm around the world in terms of how used we are to receiving some of these services remotely. So certainly I think those businesses that have solutions in that medtech and healthcare space will be well placed, as will those in cybersecurity, big issue in India. I was there, in fact, got back on the 28th of February this year, so I was a little concerned myself about travelling internationally. But that was, yeah, cybersecurity and fintech were big areas of focus in India, as are advanced manufacturing and, of course, food and beverage. So they're just a few insights from a couple of the markets. I might, just given timing, I might pause there so that you can move to some of the follow-up questions, Kylie, if you've got them.
Great, thanks. So actually we'll open the questions up, so if people want to put them through. We've got one here for Dianne. You might be able to help with this one. The question is are there ocean freight subsidies available at all that you know of?
No, I do know, and I don't know of any that are available. Freights will come down because more and more exporters are getting back into the export arena, if you like, and it won't come down. They won't come down to the rates that would have been probably competitively available at the end of last year. Although we do have fluctuations in sea freight rates anyway. We have the Christmas period, and then we have the Chinese New Year, which we need to understand. Chinese is our largest trading partner. So whenever it's Chinese New Year or Christmas or whatever, we do have fluctuation in rates. The thing that we need to do is sit down and re-strategize our business plan. Anyone with an exporting business needs to look at their business plan now and re-strategize their costings. This is not going to go away in a hurry, but we can still export. We need to export. So it's just a matter of restructuring. A lot of, Cherith was talking earlier, there's a lot of exporters that have contracts in place. A lot of contracts have certain pricing in them. What do you do if you have to fulfill that contract? Can you renegotiate? They're the types of issues that you may need to have a funding available for the next year or so. I think, Cherith, your package is a 2-year program. Is that correct?
Yes, up to max under the new export capital facility, a maximum up to 24 months.
Yeah, so maybe it is a worth really good idea to talk to EFA and see what you can do there to ensure that your product can continue to move. You will be paying slightly higher prices. If you are air freighting, you will definitely be paying slightly higher prices for quite a while. International flights are not deemed to commence again till the end of the year in Australia, and I'm not an expert on that, but it doesn't look like they're going to happen in the next month or 2 or 3 months. So that needs to be planned. A business plan is, a restructure of your export business plan really needs to take place now. Your costing, your finances, and everything that you had in place before has changed, and the world has changed. So obviously everything we do has changed.
I think that's
Kylie, just a quick comment there. New South Wales Government ran a webinar last week specifically on this issue of freight, and we've got a recording of that I can distribute, but we had Ports New South Wales and Freight Forwarding Association talk about that, so we can distribute the link to that recording if that's helpful.
That would be very helpful, I think. So if you want to put it into the Q&A, or obviously let Therese and myself know afterwards, we can get that out with the recording to everybody, because I think that would be an excellent one for people to get to. In picking up on your point, Diane, about you've got to spend some time re-strategizing. I think that's a very critical thing. It's not just rethink your current model and its inputs and its contingency plans and all that sort of stuff, but it's also rethink your model. Is there other ways that you can actually, I know the trendy term is pivot, but basically, is there other ways that you can add value to your business in the post-COVID era? And a really simple domestic example, obviously, is Woolworths partnering with Uber to deliver groceries. Now, if you spoke to Uber, they would have never said that they were in the food delivery business. They would have said they were in the people movement business. But needs must, and the two different sectors have put their brains together and gone, well, hang on, if I need to move goods and people, what are my options? And it's that strategizing about thinking about, well, if I need to move my goods or my people, what options do I have? How can I, repurpose my product? What other market might it be suitable for? And trying to actually think differently about how your current business model might go into the future.
I think it's imperative, Kylie, to be honest.
Yeah, that's right. I think there's, everything from, even some companies are just saying it's good to have the time to rethink their, online marketing strategy because, they've got a bit of extra time to do the things that they didn't have time to do before. So I think there's some positives in that. And I can see that also if you want some help with re-strategizing, obviously there's lots of federal and state agencies and, different sort of consultancy firms and things like that. But there's also the SME export hubs that exist around that complement Trade Start and other government programs to help SMEs actually do exactly that, think about some of their strategies when it comes to export. We have another question here. Yes, very good question. Do we see industries such as medical equipment, ventilators going to be an opportunity across the globe for Australian manufacturers who have been successful in obtaining TGA approvals? I think the very short answer of that is going to be absolutely, but Peter or actually anyone want to take that one?
I was just actually typing a response to mine. Yeah, look, absolutely. And that was an obvious one we left off there. We not so much the export team, but probably more our broader investment team have been working really closely with Australian businesses in helping them make those transitions. Again, initially in the first instance about building capacity here, but now that we're in a pretty good place, I think we're going to be very well positioned to be able to offer that as a new, really, prospective export sector. So in a moment, I'm going to put up our contact details, Kylie, but that's something our trade investment team can absolutely help businesses identify. And
there's no doubt that the world is rethinking their supply chain approach. So, the old adage used to be just in time. Now supply chains all over the place are going to be thinking, well, I need to have contingency in there with local or onshore supply. I need to have multiple suppliers. I need to have, a different way of managing my inventory to make sure I've got some just in case inventories in some of these very sensitive areas. So I think we're going to, particularly in that medical side, as you say, it's an immediate no-brainer. And again, people in that space should use New South Wales and Austrade in particular to help them with some of that certification. So obviously having TGA is great, but you'll have similar certification requirements in each of the market that you're going into to make sure that you meet the health and safety requirements of those markets. So that's a great question. Thanks, Wayne. We've got any other questions coming in? If not, looking at the time, I'm going to probably do a round robin with our panelists today. Let me just see if there's one more that's popped in. No. Last chance dance, everyone who's listening. Otherwise, we'll do a... Okay, so thanks again for everyone's time. Before I close the session, I might just do a quick round robin and ask, I'll start with you, Peter, and then I'll go to you, Cherith, and you, Diane, just because that's the order you are on my screen. If there was one thing that you wanted...
Sorry, Kylie, there was a question from Wayne. Do you want me to just answer that quickly?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So thanks, Wayne, for the question. Yeah, absolutely. So Pacific Islands, in our normal course of operations, as long as it's a product export out of Australia to a Pacific Island, we are happy to look at financing requirements, whether that's working capital to support that opportunity. But outside of that, we also can provide buyer finance opportunities as well. So there are examples where we've provided financing to our neighboring countries if it's a sovereign entity that wish to borrow in order to increase capacity in their in a particular industry or aspect. So it gets a bit more complicated than lending to Australian business, obviously. So I won't go into too much detail, but I just wanted to quickly answer that to say yes, it is an option that would be available.
Fantastic, thanks, Cherith. And of course, it helps if I scroll down rather than just look at my Q&A and go, oh yeah, no, there's no more questions. Okay, so the last question was, what's the one thing you'd like the participants in the webinar to remember from what you spoke about today? Peter.
I've just typed in, and I'm hoping you can see that. I'm not sure if that's come up yet, but I've just put in the link there to the Export Advisor Network. So what I would encourage people to do is to click on, has that link come through? I just can't see it there. Can you see that, Kylie, the link?
I can't, but I wouldn't use me as your test guinea pig on capabilities. So,
I'll try and put that in again. So I would encourage people to get in touch with one of our export advisors if they're either a current exporter or they're thinking about exporting. They can assess, where you're at, what your objectives are, and they can put you in contact with our international network. I've also got the link to that freight and logistics webinar from YouTube, so I'll try and put that into the link as well. So perhaps when you go on to Cherith for a final comment, hopefully that will work. And if it doesn't, I'll send them to you and you can distribute it.
That'd be great. Thank you. Cherith, the one thing you want them to remember?
I may be biased, but cash flow is king in normal circumstances, but even more important in situations such as this, where companies may have experienced drops of revenue up to 50% or over. So my advice would be to make sure that you utilize all the stimulus packages that are available, whether that's at the federal level or state level. Also looking at your cost base to ensure that you can operate leanly as possible over the next at least 12-18 months until things get back to normal. To Diane's point earlier, in terms of borrowing more money, and as a lender, we need to follow responsible lending guidelines as well. So we would always look at, is putting on more debt on a company is the best thing for the company? But there will be situations that requires debt financing, and any lender would be happy to look at those. But that would be my advice, mainly look at from a cost base and a cash flow point of view to manage the next 12 months or so.
And Cherith, thank you for that. There's a very specific question to you in the Q&A. If you want to have a look and if you're able to answer, that'd be awesome. If not, we can do it after the session. Dianne, the one thing you'd like everyone to remember?
Well, other than keep exporting, it is good for Australia, it's good for everyone. And it's important now. We need to obviously keep our economic viability, going forward. We've paid a lot out to maintain our health and our security within Australia. So exporting is a wonderful way to grow and develop and bring us back to some sort of viability going forward. But just, for all exporters and would-be exporters, please sit down and review your plan. And I do hope everyone has an export plan. Review your strategy, look at the world a little differently. It has changed, as I said earlier. You need to change. We all need to change. We need to look at, digitalizing as much as possible. You can't do that with a product if you're a widget manufacturer or a food manufacturer, but digitalize as much as you can. Other than that, the opportunity to get back into the market or continue in the market is there. There are flights and sea freight happening. Make sure you get the right information from as many people as you can, from New South Wales Government, from EFA, from Austrade, from industry bodies, including the Export Council. We're all here to help, and we all want Australia to succeed and be very, very healthy, wise and wealthy when the years go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kylie, can I finish with one plug, possibly?
Of course.
So this afternoon, I should have mentioned earlier, we, New South Wales Treasury, will be running a webinar on developing a cross-border e-commerce strategy. It's a webinar at 3 p.m. We're doing that in partnership with Austrade, with Jack Glue, who's their e-commerce specialist. And we've got two great case studies, one a company that's selling domestically successfully using e-commerce platforms, and one that's doing it successfully internationally. And I might send you the forward link to our upcoming webinar series for businesses that might want to join those as well. And I've put up the link to the, I think successfully, to both the Export Advisors and the freight webinar. So that was just a couple of plugs from me.
Well done. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of today's session. I'd like to thank Therese O'Dwyer, who's the CEO of the RDA Sydney, and her right hand, Julie McAlpin, for pulling today together and ensuring that technology has worked. Woohoo! A copy of the recording will be sent to everybody, along with any unanswered questions from the Q&A and those links that Peter was talking about. A big thank you, obviously, to our panel, Diane Tipping, Cherith Amarasinghe, and Peter Mackey, for sharing their expertise and thoughts with us today. And lastly, and most importantly, thank you to everyone who joined us online for this event. Our economic recovery post-COVID-19 will obviously depend heavily on the efforts of our most amazing export community. And I do wish everyone the very best of luck with recovering from an economic shock and a health shock that none of us could have foreseen. Don't forget, you don't have to do it by yourself. Part of the reason we pulled together today's panel is to help you understand that there is help available. Please ask, we're here to help. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kylie.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Kylie.
you.
Thanks, everyone.